Hi, everyone. Miss you all so much. It's fun and exciting to be with you, even by the computer. I'll take what I can get right now, but we sure miss you all at the museum. We're thrilled tonight to be able to gather here together to talk about a program that we love so much. We're so proud of, the ACME initiative, and you're going to learn all about it, and you're going to learn a lot about the wonderful exhibition that's on view. Um, as we begin our event tonight, I would like to express, as always, my great, sincere gratitude to all of you, our UMFA art lovers, our amazing board of directors members, our fabulous UMFA general members. This community of human beings really makes the museum and all the good work that we do in the community and across the state. It makes it all possible. So we know that this has been a challenging time during these COVID months, and we have all sort of quickly, left our beautiful building and are really rethinking different ways of doing museum right now, right? And this virtual event is a great example of that. We're trying to make lemonade with lemons here, folks, and trying to find new ways of connecting and staying connected people to our community and to the people we love and work so hard to serve. So thanks for being here tonight. We seriously couldn't do anything without you. This initiative, the ACME initiative, would not be possible without generous support from our partners and our sponsors, the Joanne L. Schrontz Family Foundation, our ACME exhibition and lab sponsor, the Sam and Diane Stewart Family Foundation, the curatorial sponsor of this particular project you're going to learn about tonight, and of course, Better Days 2020, our wonderful community partner with whom we've been working for many, many moons now to pull this exhibition and this program together. The ACME Lab is housed inside the Emma Eccles-Jones Education Center at the UMFA on our first floor. And I really want to say thank you to all of these wonderful, generous supporters for making this program and this work possible. Additionally, I'm delighted to remind you that this exhibition and this work is in part supported by a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, additionally with generous support from the National Endowment for the Arts, and additionally some money, a lot of money actually, from the Hearst Foundations, which has been a partner of our museum for many years. We are immensely grateful to every one of those sponsors as well. And finally, before I get off my sponsor thank you soapbox, I want to remind us all about ZAP. Zoo Arts and Parks makes so much of the good work of the museum possible, and we're deeply grateful for that ZAP program and for the support of our county residents to make the good of the museum possible. So tonight's event celebrates really one of our most interesting, incredible, and dynamic programs at the museum, and which we have lovingly come to know as our ACME initiative. It's really kind of a three-part thing. And before I turn it over to Phoebe, who's going to get this whole thing rolling, I thought I would just sort of explain to you the lay of the land so far as ACME is concerned. So you may remember during our renovation closure in 2016, we were really thinking critically about what is the UMFA? How do we be the very best community engaged museum we can be? And what is, more broadly, what is the public role of an art museum? What should we be thinking about, and how can we serve our community best? And really those conversations, Jorge was new to our staff as our Director of Learning and Engagement. We had lots of conversations about getting out of the building. We didn't have a building while we were renovating. So we had this unique opportunity to think beyond our campus and think beyond the Price Museum building. And that's how ACME was born. It stands for Art, Community, Museum, and Education. And it really has become, in just this short period of time, a nationally recognized initiative that's all about rethinking the public role of the art museum. This unique program focuses on strengthening the relevance of the museum for increasingly diverse community here in Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City. And ACME's goals are always to amplify diverse voices in the museum and in our community, to connect and celebrate artists, activists, residents, and community-based organizations with whom we want to build a stronger ecosystem and stronger relationships, to build community around socially engaged art that really is engaged with the issues that matter to all of us as human beings today, and catalyze community-generated change for good. And through this community outreach initiative, ACME informs future programs. It really has impacted the way the UMFA thinks about our work more broadly. And it has enriched our experience, the way that we talk about our audiences, our communities, and how best we can serve them. Inside the UMFA, of course, you know that you will find the ACME Lab in the Emma Eccles-Jones Education Space. It's an exhibition space for art experimentation and exploration. Visitors of all ages are encouraged to ask questions, make connections across disciplines, and engage with art in new ways. The lab promotes collaboration between museum and community through active participation, providing an avenue for mutual learning, discovery, and understanding, and really impacting our practice within the museum, how we do everything. Outside of the museum's walls, you all probably are familiar with our bi-monthly ACME sessions. These are community meetups exploring a broad range of topics related to different issues that matter to us and to our local community. And they're hosted in partnership with the Salt Lake Public Library, neighborhood branches, as well as some other wonderful art spaces in town. And we're really reaching out into parts of the city that frankly many visitors from those parts of the cities don't come to our museum, our campus. So it gives us a chance to get to know our community and people living in our community better. And at the University of Utah, the sort of third arm of ACME, we conduct what has come to be called ACME Scholars. And this is very much a Jorge Rojas-driven initiative. It's a mentorship program as well as a class. It engages undergraduate students at the University of Utah Honors College in art and social justice related activities on campus and in the community. And I can tell you, we, the UMFA, benefit so much from just being connected to these amazing young people, their ideas, their energy, and their passion. So that's it for me. I'm now really delighted to pass the screen to one of our very newest staff members, Phoebe Davenport, who joined the museum just before this COVID thing all started happening. Phoebe is our ACME coordinator, and she's going to take us through the next bit. So Phoebe, I'm happy to pass it off to you. Thanks and hello, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Gretchen. Our current ACME Lab, Utah Women Working for Better Days, is a unique collaboration at an important moment in Utah history. Celebrating a number of voting rights anniversaries in 2020, including the 150th anniversary of Utah as the first state where women voted under an equal suffrage law, this exhibition brings together Better Days 2020, an organization championing Utah women's history across the state, a team from the University of Utah's J. Willard Marriott Library Special Collections, and the Utah Museum of Fine Arts. The stories told in this lab via historical documentation, sound, video, photographs, protest posters, and original works of art created by Utah artist Brooke Smart weave together narratives of women who challenge the status quo. This includes figures like Seraph Young, a Utahn who became the first woman in the United States to vote legally in 1870, as well as other professionals, artists, and community leaders. While this exhibition explores the narratives of dynamic women who changed Utah and in turn our country, the lab invites visitors to consider powerful women in their own lives and the ways in which they've influenced or empowered them. Moreover, the space serves as an invitation for people of all genders, ages, and backgrounds to consider how they might become involved citizens by advocating, campaigning, voting, or even running for office. Each story told in this ACME Lab presents the dreams and possibilities championed by the women in the show, diverse versions of what better days might bring. We invite you to consider what better days might also look like to you. I'm now happy to introduce you to our speakers for tonight. Catherine Kitterman is the Historical Director for Better Days 2020, a nonprofit dedicated to sharing Utah women's history. She is the co-author of 2 recent books about the history of women's voting rights in Utah, Champions of Change, 25 Women Who Made History, and Thinking Women, a timeline of suffrage in Utah. Catherine is also a PhD candidate at American University. Her dissertation analyzes the rhetoric of women's struggle for suffrage in 19th century Utah, highlighting the two-way connection between suffragists in West and East. Jessica Bryman is the Art and Archives Metadata Librarian on the Andrew W. Mellon Grant Land Art, Landscapes, and the American West, a joint research and engagement initiative of the J. Willard Marriott Library and the Utah Museum of Fine Arts. Prior to this position, she was a moving image and sound archivist in J. Willard Marriott Library's Special Collections. Her research interests include culturally inclusive metadata and sustainable collaboration on university campuses. Alana Wolf is a collections research curator at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts and a doctoral candidate in visual and cultural studies at the University of Rochester. Her research in art history, sound studies, and cultural geography deals with the intersection of art and technology in American modernism. Now, please welcome our first presenter, Catherine Kitterman.
Hi, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here tonight and to share some of the things that we've talked about coming up with this collaboration. Better Days 2020 has been really grateful to the generous offer to partner with the UMFA and the Marriott Library in working on this collection, this ACME Lab exhibit. We know that a lot of things look a little different this year than we had hoped, but we're really glad for the opportunity in this moment when there's a lot of conversation to talk about how women play a role in Utah and in the nation, and what kinds of ways and avenues women have used to make that change, to get themselves into places of political power and to work towards equality. So, as was already mentioned, Better Days 2020, the nonprofit that I work for, is a Utah-based 501c3 nonprofit. We are focused on amplifying Utah women's history through education and public art, and our goal is really to make women's stories more visible in public life. We want Utahns to know a little bit more about the legacy of women's leadership we have in this state, because we believe that knowing where we came from and knowing more about our past can change the possibilities for the future and open doors for conversations about Utah women today. Our funding mostly comes from the Utah State Legislature. We've received legislative appropriations in the past 3 years, but we also have received grants from local foundations and businesses. And for the past 2 years, we've really been focused on one single story that's very important this year. It's because of those 3 anniversaries that Phoebe mentioned earlier. So this year in 2020, Utahns are commemorating 3 big deals for women's voting rights and voting rights in general in the United States. The first one is the 150th anniversary of Utah women's first votes. That took place in February of 1870. We had a big party at the Capitol with a lot of students to celebrate that earlier this year. The second anniversary that's a big deal that everyone will be talking about in just a few weeks is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which was ratified in 1920. And this amendment guaranteed, in some ways, women's right to vote. It said that women's voting rights couldn't be denied on account of their sex. But that didn't mean that all women could cast ballots, because there were other discriminatory practices that kept people from the ballot box. So there's the 55th anniversary also this year of the Voting Rights Act. That was the next piece of legislation that was really important in extending voting rights, protecting voting rights for women and men of color. There's still work that needs to be done. So as we look back at these achievements and these pieces of legislation that were landmark achievements and steps forward, we're also looking forward to the work that still needs to be done to ensure that everyone in our society has a voice and has a way to make their preferences known in our society. I'm going to talk to you about a few of the things and the projects that Better Days 2020 has been working on for the past couple of years. Then I'll share a brief overview of a history of women's voting rights in Utah, the history that inspired this exhibit. And then we'll talk about one of our projects that we've done to share the history through art that actually led to the opportunity to collaborate with the ACME Lab. So this website that you see here, utahwomenshistory.org, is something that we've been working on for the last couple of years. The majority of our funding at Better Days 2020 went for educational curriculum and teacher training. So we've trained over 1,000 teachers in partnership with the Tanner Humanities Center at the U of U to teach women's history in their Utah Studies classes, to bring in the story of women's work for voting rights right here in Utah, but also to talk about how they can incorporate more women's stories into the history that they share. So you can find a lot of that on utahwomenshistory.org, as well as articles, blog posts, biographies, videos, and more content. You can also find this content on our social media channels at Better Days 2020. Another cool thing we've been working on this year is a public awareness campaign. It's the Utah Heritage Campaign, and you may have seen these billboards on I-15 in recent months, or if you've been driving around recently, they're now up on street banners in downtown Salt Lake City up through the end of August. So a couple of things to know about the history that we're sharing this year. We wanted to use the anniversary of Utah women's voting rights as a way to open the door to conversations about equality, participation, justice in this democracy. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about this history because it's a a fascinating and complicated and complex story that I think you'll enjoy before we get into some of the ways we've tried to share it. Utah's suffrage history was unique for several reasons, and I've listed those on the screen here, but basically what you need to know is that women gained voting rights early in Utah. When women voted here in 1870, they were the first to cast ballots under an equal suffrage law. That means that they had the same voting rights as men in the community. And a lot of people know that Wyoming was the first place to pass a suffrage law, but many people don't know that Utah followed just 2 months later, and that women went to the polls here first due to the timing of elections. So that's our claim to distinction, and we're going to run with it. A lot of people also were surprised to learn that there was a high level of community support for women's voting rights here in Utah. Generally speaking, religious leadership, political leadership was in favor of women's right to vote, and it wasn't quite the same struggle as it was in some other places, although we'll talk about where the drama comes in, and that's with polygamy. The practice of the 19th century LDS practice of polygamy was really intertwined with women's voting rights from their very beginning. As the national leaders in Congress tried to work to end the practice of polygamy here in Utah, women's voting rights became a political football as this conflict moved back and forth. And that led to some interesting complications and some interesting opportunities for Utah women. One of the reasons why women gained the right to vote in 1870 is because many people thought that women would vote out the practice of polygamy somehow, that they would use the political power they gained to change that practice. And then when that didn't happen, Congress actually was pressured into taking the right to vote away of Utah women. So women voted here in Utah from 1870 until 1887. After 17 years of voting, Congress disenfranchised women by passing an anti-polygamy law that also revoked Utah women's right to vote. And that was all women, Mormon or not, married or single, monogamous or polygamous. That didn't sit too well with a lot of women who had been voting for a long time, and they formed the Utah Women's Suffrage Association in 1889 to win the right to vote back. Now, as a territory, they couldn't undo legislation from Congress, so they focused on preparing the groundwork for Utah's statehood and making sure that local political leaders would include women's right to vote once Utah became a state in that state constitution. You can see a few women illustrated here who were key players in that. Also, a Utah Women's Suffrage Songbook, which was written and created by women here in Utah. They wrote their own words to songs like the Battle Hymn of the Republic and popular LDS hymns as well. And they would sing these songs at suffrage meetings across the territory. There were 21 suffrage associations in the different counties across Utah and many more cities and towns. We don't have lists or membership rolls from most of these organizations, but we do know that their membership numbered in the thousands. There were women across the territory and men who would meet monthly to give lectures on women's equality, to sing, to recite poetry, to talk about political issues, and also to plan parties and political events and parades that would help keep the pressure on local elected officials to remember that this issue was important to many in their community. Once Utah women regained the right to vote with Utah statehood in 1896, that activity that they had been doing and preparing and mobilizing and petitioning and testifying entered a new phase when they were able to run for public office. Women also continued to support the push for the 19th Amendment. Here in Utah, they had learned that Congress could change the law, especially on territories, but that state-by-state approach wasn't going to work to protect women's voting rights, and they were strong supporters of the 19th Amendment. Utah women met with their legislative officials. They made sure that Utah's congressional delegation was some of the most outspoken supporters of the 19th Amendment in Congress. And they also often testified to Congress that the effects of women voting hadn't been what the detractors had feared or prophesied. They would talk about how they could keep house and vote, how they could sweep floors and still think about politics. Shocking statements, I know, right? But at the time, this was a real concern for many people across America. And the example of women in Utah who had been voting for decades at this point was very helpful as lawmakers considered the implications of extending the franchise further. In 1920, when the 19th Amendment was ratified and became law, Utah women had been voting for a total of 41 years. There had been over 140 women elected to state and local office across Utah, and you can find out more about them and their biographies at utahwomenshistory.org. So that's a brief overview of the history, but I want to make sure that we include this important caveat that in 1920 or 1896 or 1870, not all women could go to the polls. Voting rights were tied to citizenship, and discriminatory laws based on US citizenship and voting still kept women from the polls due to their race or national origin. So it's important to know that many Native Americans, many indigenous nations were denied US citizenship until Congress passed the Indian Citizenship Act in 1924. And even after that, many states, including Utah, had laws on the books that prevented Native Americans living on reservations from voting. Utah only changed that law in 1957, excuse me. Many immigrants from Asian countries were also legally prohibited from becoming citizens of the US and therefore gaining voting rights until 1952. And as you know, legal barriers put in place by many states, although not here in Utah, made it really difficult for African Americans to register and vote. That was the practice of poll taxes, literacy tests, and other things. When Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, some of that changed, but much work remains to secure equal access to the ballot box for us all. So that's a little introduction to the history of voting rights here in Utah. And there are many fascinating and strong women who are here engaging on both sides of this debate. Pro-polygamy, anti-polygamy, pro-suffrage, anti-suffrage. There were women who worked together, who worked against each other, who felt that each other was ruining their cause and were their mortal enemies, and who were willing to work with people even when they disagreed with them in order to move a common goal forward. And as we thought about the importance of this story in shaping young Utahns' minds about what they can do, about the importance of civic engagement and building movements and speaking out for justice, we wanted to introduce them to a large cast of characters and make that story come alive for them. So we created these trading cards based on some of the illustrations that you've already seen in my slides. We commissioned local artist Brooke Smart to do a series of 50 here. So we wanted to cover a wide swath of time, represent a diverse range of Utah women who made change happen here. And we also included a few men, because men can be women's rights advocates as well. And we included many people who worked for women's rights in other ways beyond suffrage, whether that was disability rights, education, equal opportunity in professional pursuits, or other things as well. We wanted to bring Utah history to life for students and for those of us for whom a black and white photo of a woman wearing a black silk dress from the 1890s and not smiling might be a little hard to relate to. So we worked with Brooke because we were fascinated by her use of illustration to tell a story. In illustrations, you may lose some of the sense of historicity that you get in a photograph, but you gain the ability to show more than just a static snapshot of somebody's life. You can tell a story through what's included in that illustration. And it's a long process. It takes a lot of time to do this well. We worked over the course of about a year and a half, asking community leaders who they would pick to represent their communities. We did a lot of historical research into these women's lives, finding material in archives and libraries like the Marriott Library at University of Utah. We tracked down family members. Sometimes that meant we were stalking them through Ancestry.com. Sometimes it meant we were driving to tribal council meetings or just cold calling. But we did a lot of work to try to make sure that these women could be represented in the most authentic way possible. Brooke worked with family members to make sure that the illustration details, quotes, and other things really represented the women in a way that their descendants felt comfortable with. They made changes. Some women, we drew a couple different nose options. We changed colors, we changed clothing and background to make that fit. I'm just going to talk to you about one person here, actually two people, excuse me, the illustrations that I loved the most. Alberta Henry was a longtime NAACP president, and you can see so many things about her life in Salt Lake City represented in this illustration. You can see a University of Utah pin because she earned an honorary doctorate from the U. You can see an envelope representing the student foundation that she funded for scholarships. You can see even the pose and the dress that she's wearing that come from important moments in her life. Her quote, "Fairness must work in every kind of way," was picked by a mentee of hers who now leads the NAACP in Utah. Another person whose illustration I love is Alice Kasai, who ran the Japanese American Citizenship League during World War II. She's holding a chapter of a book that she wrote about Japanese American life in Utah. She's wearing the medal for her service, and she's pictured in the International Peace Gardens in the Japanese section that she built after World War II. Alice Kasai's husband had been sent to an internment camp by the US government during the war, and she worked during and after the war to ensure that bridges of friendship and understanding could replace war and hatred. That was her life's work, and we wanted to make sure that that showed up there as well. So there are a lot of good stories in this collection of 50 and in the 18 of those collection that are in the ACME lab. But what we want to make sure that you understand from these illustrations is that there are a multitude of different ways to make a difference. Voting was just one step, and it was a very important step. But the women who sought the right to vote sought to open doors of opportunities so that they could have a say in public life, so that generations further down the line would have equal opportunities for professions, education, religious rights, and so on. And as you look at the variety of ways that these women have worked to make change, we hope that it inspires you to think about the ways that you yourself can stand up for justice and equality, can make the world a little bit of a better place for people in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. First of all, thank you, Catherine. I'm Alana Wolf. I am Collections Research Curator here at the UMFA. Catherine, thanks for being such a fantastic collaborator. It's been fantastic to work with you and to work with Better Days. It has been about since the beginning of 2019 that our team first met, which feels like millennia ago to start working on this project. And today what I'm going to show you is a small snapshot of some of the finished product that's in the UMFA's ACME lab right now, which I do hope that everyone will be able to come and visit when our doors are open. But for every exhibition that you see in a museum, without exception, I would be willing to say, there is another or sometimes several others behind it that you don't necessarily get to see when you come into the museum. And sometimes what makes it into the museum is really interesting. Sometimes what doesn't make it into the exhibition is also a very interesting story. So we'll take a peek at that as well. As Gretchen mentioned, this exhibition in part is a collaboration with the Marriott Library in a project called Landscape Land Art and the American West. You'll be hearing from Jessica Bryman next, who I've been working with on this project. And it has been a real pleasure to work with them in collaborating in putting together an exhibition that has been really challenging in terms of finding the best way to tell the story of women's suffrage in the state in a way that can speak to today's audiences, and broadening that to the story of women who have participated in many ways in Utah in art history. The initial draw for the exhibition for me personally, I would say, is the story of women's suffrage in Utah. I am a newcomer to Utah, and it was the first time I had heard it. Then when our Better Days 2020 partners shared the artwork that Brooke had created, the art historian in me was immediately impressed by how deftly she encapsulated these extraordinarily dense stories in pictorial form. The more time that we spent with Catherine and Naomi Watkins, whom we also worked with, the more I found myself wanting to learn not only about Utah women's suffrage, but more about the multiple contributions that women had made to their communities in Utah. Better Days 2020's curriculum recognizes the efforts of women who have taken on leadership roles in areas as diverse as medicine, education, law, science, activism, politics, business, arts, you name it. And because of this, it was clear that the exhibition was going to be a lot stronger if we were able to offer a fuller picture than just that of women's suffrage, and talked more about the many ways that Utah women had shaped the history of our state. It inspired the direction that our team had taken in terms of organizing the exhibition. And there were a lot of rough drafts. We went through a number of different plans before coming up with a narrative that made sense, and then we gathered material, most of which is drawn actually from the Marriott's special collections to represent 5 different types of community action that Utah women have used to shape the story of this state. The first and most obvious of these is voting, but we needed to go beyond that because as essential as voting is, and I hope that everyone who is eligible is registered to vote. But it was absolutely essential that we also demonstrate a diversity of community engagement methods, because we knew that not every person that was coming into our galleries was going to be able to vote. We have children coming into our galleries. We have people who are not necessarily living in our state, but we did want to still keep that inspiration going. And we know that even if you can not necessarily vote here, you can make a difference no matter who you are. The second area that we chose to highlight was messaging. So here we included examples of newspapers, newsletters, and other types of media that were either edited, produced, published, and otherwise run by women in Utah. And in doing this, we wanted to have visitors connect with how they might also be able to participate in public conversations through even contemporary means like social media. The section called Creating shows how Utah women use their creativity to communicate what their causes were. We have ephemera organized from demonstrations, public campaigns, and other events that have taken place as far as more than a century apart, from the Utah Women's Suffrage Songbook, which is very rare that we have a copy of, that Catherine referenced in the exhibition, all the way to banners and posters that were carried in the 2017 March on Washington. Contacting includes examples of Utah women who have corresponded with government leaders, emphasizing just how much influence constituents can have by directly reaching out to their elected officials. This section was meant to encourage visitors to connect with their own representatives. And then finally, we have Running for Office, which features archival campaign material that represents Utah women who actively sought out official positions to create change. And we wanted this section to plant a seed, suggesting that tomorrow's elected officials could be the same ones that are visiting in the galleries now, who may not be able to necessarily vote, but we wanted to give them the opportunity to think about where they might be shaping the future of their state. So in putting this entire exhibition together, there were many steps. There was a long checklist of more than 200 objects that might have gone into this, that was narrowed down and narrowed down and narrowed down bit by bit. But eventually we had to make some choices. So there is the other side of what did not make it into the exhibition. So those other exhibitions that I referred to earlier, one of the first things that I did when we started working on this exhibition was to research the UMFA's own collections to see if we had any works that represented some of the women that Brooke Smart had featured and that were in Better Days 2020's collection, or curriculum rather, because we had hoped that we had something that would reflect as well from our collection. Some of the UMFA's most powerful images that illustrate women's contributions are in a series of exquisite 1940s woodcuts by Elizabeth Catlett. However, our team didn't include these because as much as we loved them, there was not a clear connection to Utah in particular with these. This also meant that Marisol's women's equality did not make the cut, despite its direct reference to two well-known figures in the American suffrage movement, nor Zoe Leonard's I Want a President, despite its declaration of ballot booth desire. The imagery that we do have in our collection, meanwhile, posed some different challenges. So here we have Susanna Kirby's This Is the Place, and it's another beloved image from our collection. And yet, as we discussed, we wondered whether visitors might wrongly focus on the prominent buildings engulfed in flames as a sort of call to action, and whether that might read as sort of the wrong message for how we were trying to inspire our visitors in taking action on their own. John Schaefer's Mrs. Utah pageant from 1982 ticked off actually quite a few boxes for our team. It depicts Utah women, for sure. They're engaged in a public forum. However, we felt like the image didn't quite represent what we were going for. It not only erases the uniqueness of these women and how they're contributing, but we don't even have names for them. We've actually reduced them down to a number. And that wasn't really the message that we wanted to send. In Fred Wright's photograph from the same year, Republican women gather to hear Orrin Hatch speak in Utah, and it's a perfect time capsule. I love the wood paneled walls and the carpet, and the identical hairdos are just perfect representations of the time. But putting it in the gallery by itself without some kind of counterpart felt a little bit partisan, because unlike our imagery that we have with Reva Beck-Basson and Ivy Baker-Priest, we didn't have something to sort of counterbalance Wright's campaign. So we understood that because the collection didn't quite have what we wanted in terms of representing the full picture of contributions that Utah women specifically had made to our state, we felt that it was important to include an interactive where visitors could speak back to us and tell us about their own experiences with women in their own lives. Because one important thing that we realized as we spoke around the table about our own experiences with women that were meaningful in our own lives was that not all of the women that we talked about were going to find their way into a museum collection. They weren't going to find their way into a museum archive or a library, or necessarily have a newspaper article written about them ever. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a space where people could talk about their own experiences and honor that moment. As well, it also gave us an opportunity to reflect about how we've built collections in our archives and in our museums, and think about all of the stories that we are missing. And I think it's given us a moment to think about ways that we can improve our stories so that we can be a bit more inclusive, and hopefully we are in the process of doing that. And this is one step in that direction. Thanks so much.
My name is Jessica Bryman. I am the Art and Archives Metadata Librarian for the Jabil and Marriott Library Special Collections. And I'm very happy to be here to talk about Special Collections involvement with this ACME Lab. It's been a rare treat to collaborate with both Better Days and the UMFA. As art lovers, I'm sure you know that the staff are very fun at the UMFA, and so it's been a great experience. I was hired into my role 2 years ago as part of the Andrew W. Mellon Grant awarded to the J. Willard Marriott Library and the Utah Museum of Fine Arts. The grant was intended to foster collaboration between the library and the museum. And the library and the museum had collaborated before, but mostly sporadically. And the grant's really intended to build structural alignment so that both the museum and the library can benefit from one another's rich collections and very talented staff. This exhibit was one of our first forays into that sort of collaborative endeavors. It's very unusual, as was mentioned, because it's mostly made up of special collections objects, as well as the wonderful illustrations from Brooke Smart. And special collections objects rarely leave the library, so it's really nice for us to be able to bring them into more of a community space. Most people are unfamiliar with special collections, who we are and what we do. And our mission is really to collect, preserve, and provide access to rare and unique objects that document the past and current history of Utah and the Intermountain West. This is a range, this can be a range of formats from manuscript and pioneer diaries to home movies and oral histories. We have an extensive rare books collection that is draws from national and international sources from ancient to contemporary times, as well as a research collection that supports all of these collection areas. So the research phase of this exhibit, which I am going to talk about tonight, really highlighted for all of us, I think, both at Utah Museum of Fine Arts and the Marriott Library, how different it is to research using the library and the museum collections. So the library has thousands of collections, and one collection can sometimes just be, it can be one box, it can be half a box, it can also be 600 boxes. So it really ranges. And although this exhibit is in, a relatively small space, I can tell you that tens of hours worth of research went into finding the exact right objects that were both relevant and visually compelling. And during this time, the research phase, I can tell you that when I was going through all of these collections, there was so much that I wanted to put in and that we just couldn't. As Alana alluded to, there was just not enough space, or it didn't fit quite right. But there were several themes or motifs that really sort of struck me as I was going through these collections, and I'll talk about a few of those tonight. So one of the first themes that really stood out to me was that some of the same issues that women faced going back at least as far as the 1920s continue today and still need to be addressed. This particular clipping is from the Salt Lake Council of Women records. The Council of Women was started in 1912, and it was sort of a conglomeration of women's clubs and individual members. And it's this particular clipping, it stood out to me because it's about the council's lobbying for more money to be allotted to smoke abatement and air pollution in the Salt Lake Valley. The measure the council proposed did not pass, but one of the city commissioners, George Kaiser, notes that any attention paid to this issue was due to the women's efforts, and he implores them to keep fighting. And, you know, for certain, this is something we still talk about today, and that even with millions of dollars allotted, we're probably not doing enough. Jumping ahead into 1973, this is a local chapter newsletter of the National Women's Political Caucus. I pulled this from the Utah Women's Issues collection. And the newsletter is stating basically that there are not enough women's representation on the ballot, and they're looking for more volunteers to run for office. This is still true in Utah. We have 24% of the state legislature is women, but that's still beneath the national average, even though that's an all-time high for Utah. We've sent 4 women in total to nationally the House of Representatives, and we have never sent a woman to the Senate. The first woman we sent to the House of Representatives, her name was Riva Beck-Basone. And I love this photo of her because I feel like it sort of encapsulates this issue in total. This is a photo of her at a congressional delegation breakfast with guests, and she is there in the very back, and she is the only woman present. So that seemed appropriate in terms of what we're talking about tonight. Another theme or motif that really struck me through this process was looking at all of these collections and being struck by the amount of work, like what you might call sort of ordinary women put in, and how important it was for people who weren't in office and, you know, maybe weren't names that you're going to read in a history book, how important their work was to, you know, women's issues and forwarding those causes. These 2 items come out of the collection of Loretta Young. And as I mentioned, she's someone you might call sort of an ordinary woman. She was born in 1899. She had 5 children with her husband. She took care of her kids. She was employed outside of her home. She managed all the household expenses meticulously. You can see from her ledger on the right-hand side that she's documented you know, gray wool shirts and tan sling pumps and candy for the kids. She was also a lifelong political activist, and she was involved in political organizations up almost until when she died in 1988. And so she was involved with the Utah Democratic Party, the Wasatch Business and Professional Women, and the Utah State Coalition of Senior Citizens, among other organizations. This flyer about women's poverty came out of her collection as well. And there was another one that struck me as relevant to what women are fighting for today. And as well, you know, some of these phrases on these hand-drawn flyers just stuck with me. As 2 or 100, the flyer says, we can and will make a difference. So on this next slide, on the right-hand side where it says action, ask for full funding, that flyer came out of the Sharon Kiger collection. I actually did not know much about Sharon Kiger. She died in 1981. Her collection is very small. It's 1.5 boxes, and it's focused on her involvement with women's issues. And one of the this flyer is about lobbying for full funding for the Governor's Commission on the Status of Women. The commission was established in the 60s, but it actually wasn't funded until the mid-1970s. And I've actually been trying to still locate any final reports or legislation coming out of the commission. And that's been a little bit of an uphill battle. It's something that's still in progress. I selected this flyer mostly because I found it so compelling as a call to action, and especially the way it urges women not to let their elected legislators conveniently forget them. And as well, I've placed it alongside a poster from the women's marches in 2016, because it's sort of the coming, full circle around to contemporary, ephemera that we're collecting, in which women are lobbying for their legislators not to forget them and their causes. This kind of activism by, what you might say are ordinary women was something we as an exhibit team wanted to focus on. Not all women want to run for office or lead an organization, but we definitely wanted to inspire in our visitors a similar message to this very compelling flyer, that there are a multiplicity of ways to get involved and participate in the political process. As Alana mentioned, another theme that came out of our research was about what wasn't there, what wasn't present in the collections. Catherine told you a little bit about Alberta Henry. She was an amazing woman, and I delved into her collection fairly deeply, and she was a pioneer in developing multicultural education. She was a community activist and a leader, and I came to understand how important her collection was in terms of all of our collections, because she really worked hard to document the African American community in Utah, not just her own work, but the work of the community. And so the 60 boxes of her collection are an incredibly valuable resource for us, especially when it comes to documenting women of color and women of color who are activists in the community. So it's a rich source of information. But for all the information that's in her collection, I still have so many questions. For instance, Alberta Henry, she wrote a book in 1986 called Contemporary Blacks in Utah. I found mention of a woman who seemed interesting. Her name was Ruth Ross. And looking for more information, I found that her obituary mentions a KUED television program called Pride. And this program was the first public television program in Utah for African Americans. And because of my background as an archivist in the audiovisual archives and special collections, I was fascinated by the program, and yet I couldn't find any more records of it. I couldn't find any manuscript material or audio or video evidence of it. I spoke with KUED, they don't have any evidence of it. And so this show would have been really groundbreaking in its time, and it just felt like such a tragedy to me in doing this research, to know that we no longer have it, or we no longer have copies of it that we know of for the public to view. The image in this slide is of Alberta Henry. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, I meant to go on to the next screen. This is actually an image of that came out of the research, and this is actually a newsletter from the Governor's Commission on the Status of Women in 1976. And at the bottom right, I've pulled it out, is Ruth Ross's name. And I actually had no idea that she had served on this commission until I actually found this newsletter in an entirely different collection from another female activist. And that's very characteristic of what primary source research is about. There's lots of breadcrumbs and trails, and the information you might be looking for is scattered. But seeing all of that does make me wonder what else is missing. And part of that speaks to the profession of archiving and what it has focused on in terms of prioritizing primarily white Americans. As a profession, I would say that, as Alana talked about, we're still working and reckoning with that past and trying to address the omission of the voices of people of color from the collections. And one of the big lessons from this research phase is that this kind of work, in terms of research and tracking down a multiplicity of voices, it's so important in terms of discovering who was there and making sure that their legacy lives on in the collections. This exhibit has been a wonderful opportunity to bring special collections out into the community spaces. And I hope that the work that we've done communicates that there are so many legacies worthy of preserving and sharing with each other.